William Hayes was a man who trusted no one, and he was about to find out he was right. The Montana wind howled like a hungry wolf outside the walls of his ranch house, a lonely fortress in a sea of sage and dust. It was 1885, and William, at 32, was the king of this harsh, empty world. He'd built an empire of cattle and land with shrewd deals and an eye that could see the rot in a man's soul. He sat by the fire, the whiskey in his glass, the color of the dying sun, and his steel-gray eyes, which had seen too much betrayal, scanned the room. He trusted his land, his horse, and the gun on his hip. People, however, were a different story. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Hayes, dinner is ready, sir." He turned. It was the girl, Eleanor Murphy. Ellie, the hands called her. She'd been his housekeeper for 3 months, a ghost in a plain gray dress who moved through his house without a sound. She was young, maybe 22, with auburn hair pinned so tightly it looked like it hurt. Her green eyes never ever met his. She was like a deer poised to bolt at the slightest noise. "Thank you, Ellie," he said. He watched her flinch just a little at her own name. She nodded once and vanished, her footsteps a whisper on the floorboards. William frowned. He'd learned one thing in his 32 years. People who try that hard to be invisible are hiding something big. And William Hayes always found out what people were hiding. It was only a matter of time. The dining room was quiet, lit by the flickering glow of oil lamps. She'd set the table with his best china, a formality he'd never asked for. The food was simple: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread still warm from the oven. It was perfect. She was always perfect. Too perfect. She stood by the door, her hands clasped, ready to disappear again. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Hayes?" An impulse, sharp and sudden, made him speak. "Sit with me." Terror flashed in her eyes. It was real, unhidden terror. "Oh, I couldn't, sir. It wouldn't be proper." "I'm not asking what's proper," he said, his voice flat. "I'm asking you to sit." She hesitated, then perched on the very edge of the chair across from him, like a bird ready to take flight. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. It sounded like a bomb counting down. "You've been here 3 months," he said, cutting his beef, "and I know nothing about you, except that you work harder than any 3 men on this ranch." "I prefer to keep to myself, sir," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the plate she didn't have. "Where are you from?" "Back east, sir." A pause. "My circumstances changed. I needed a fresh start." He studied her. Her hands were calloused, yes, but they were small, delicate. Her posture, even hunched in fear, had a straightness to it, a refinement that didn't belong in a Montana kitchen. She didn't talk like a farm girl. She spoke with the careful, clean words of an educated woman. A lady. What was a lady doing scrubbing his floors in the middle of nowhere? "What circumstances?" he pressed, keeping his voice gentle. The color drained from her face. "If you don't mind, Mr. Hayes, I'd rather not discuss my past." Her voice was shaking now. "I promise you, I mean no trouble. I just need honest work." He let the silence hang for another moment, watching her. Then he nodded slowly. "Everyone has a past, Ellie. I respect a person's right to leave it behind, as long as they're honest in the present." The relief that washed over her was so profound, it was almost a physical thing. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." Later that night, he sat in his study, pretending to read. He could hear her in the kitchen, the gentle clink of dishes, and then a soft humming. It wasn't a saloon tune or a church hymn. It was classical, a melody he hadn't heard since his brief, miserable stint in a college back east. Every detail about her was a contradiction. The quiet maid hummed opera. The frightened girl had the posture of a queen. William Hayes hadn't built his fortune by ignoring his gut, and his gut was screaming that Ellie Murphy was a lie. Tomorrow, he decided, swirling the last of his whiskey. Tomorrow I'll find out the truth. He would set a trap, a simple test of loyalty that had never failed him. He would pretend to be vulnerable, helpless, and see what the little ghost did when she thought no one was watching. He had no idea he was about to uncork a secret so dangerous it would threaten to burn his entire world to the ground. The next evening he put his plan into motion. He spent the afternoon in his office, a bottle of his best whiskey on the desk, making sure Ellie saw him pouring one glass after another as he went over the ledgers. He let his voice grow louder, his movements a little less steady. By the time the grandfather clock struck 9, he was ready. He staggered out of the study, leaning against the doorframe. Ellie was in the kitchen, wiping down the last of the counters. "Ellie," he slurred, "just enough. That's enough for tonight. Go on, get some rest." "Yes, sir," she said, her voice as quiet as ever. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." He stumbled back to his leather armchair, a stack of cattle futures reports in his hand. He sat down, let his head loll back, and let the papers slip from his fingers, scattering across the floor. He slowed his breathing, deep and even, and cracked his eyelids just enough to see the doorway through his lashes. He was a statue, a drunken rancher passed out in his chair. The bait was set. Now he just had to wait for the mouse to come for the cheese. An hour passed. The house creaked and groaned around him. Outside, the coyotes began their nightly song. William's muscles ached from the stillness. He was just about to give up, to admit he was wrong, when a flicker of light appeared in the hallway. He heard the whisper of bare feet on the hardwood. She was there. Ellie stood in the doorway, holding an oil lamp. The golden light softened her features, catching the red in her hair, which she'd taken down from its severe bun. It fell around her shoulders in soft waves. She wasn't wearing the drab gray dress, but a simple white cotton nightgown. In the lamplight, she looked different, younger, softer, beautiful. She watched him for a long moment, her head tilted. He held his breath, waiting. This was it. Would she go for the cash box on his desk, the silver letter opener, the keys to the gun cabinet? She did none of those things. Instead, she glided silently into the room. She knelt beside his chair, her movements fluid and graceful, and began to gather the papers he'd dropped. She didn't rustle them or shove them aside. She stacked them neatly, one by one, and placed them on the side table. Her touch was gentle, careful, as if she respected the work, as if she respected him. William was genuinely confused. This wasn't the act of a thief. This was something else entirely. Then she did something that nearly made him jump out of his skin. She began to sing. It was a whisper of a song, so quiet he could barely hear it. But the melody was unmistakable. It was the same classical piece she'd been humming, a German lieder. Her pronunciation was perfect, her tone pure and clear. It was the voice of a professionally trained singer. Right here, in the middle of the Montana wilderness. As she sang, she moved around the room, not cleaning, but tending. She straightened a stack of books. She adjusted a crooked painting on the wall. She ran a finger over the dusty mantelpiece, a small, sad smile on her face. This wasn't the work of a servant. It was the loving care of a wife. When the song ended, she drifted back to his chair. She stood over him, and her hand hovered just above his forehead. He could feel the warmth of her skin, could smell the faint scent of lavender soap. He saw a tear glisten on her eyelash in the lamplight, then another. "I wish," she whispered, her voice thick with sorrow, "I wish I could tell you who I am, why I'm really here." She took a shaky breath. "You've been kinder to me than anyone. You don't know what it means. To feel safe, to be treated like a person." She stopped, shaking her head as if to clear it. "I know you're suspicious. I see it in your eyes. And you have every right to be. A woman like me, with no past. William's heart was hammering against his ribs. His mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. The educated speech, the classical music, the profound sadness. I was Eleanor Blackwood, she whispered to the sleeping man, daughter of Judge Blackwood of Philadelphia. I was engaged to marry a senator's son. I had everything. The name hit William like a punch to the gut. Blackwood. He remembered the name from the newspapers he had delivered from back east. A scandal, a high society disgrace. The judge's daughter had vanished just before her wedding. They'd painted her as a flighty, ungrateful child who had shamed her powerful family. But I couldn't marry him, she breathed, her fingers finally, gently, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Not after what he did, what he tried to do. And when I told my father, no one believed me. They called me hysterical, a liar. She pulled her hand back as if burned. So I ran. I took nothing. I became Eleanor Murphy. And for 3 months, working here, I have felt more like myself than I ever did in those gilded cages back home. She looked at his face, her own filled with a tenderness that made something in his chest ache. You make me feel safe, William Hayes, and tomorrow you will wake up and I will be your quiet little housekeeper again. But tonight, I just wanted to say thank you. She leaned down. Her lips were soft, a feather-light touch against his forehead. Sleep well, she whispered, and then she was gone. The lamplight disappeared down the hall, leaving him alone in the suffocating darkness, with the weight of her secret crushing the air from his lungs. Sleep did not come for William Hayes. He sat in that leather chair until the first gray light of dawn bled through the window, the world outside slowly taking shape from the darkness. Eleanor Blackwood. The name echoed in his mind. The newspaper stories had been cruel, painting her as a spoiled brat. But the woman who had confessed her soul in the darkness, who had shown him such gentle care, that was not a spoiled brat. That was a survivor. He thought of the terror in her eyes when he'd asked her to dinner. He thought of the flawless German, the sad, beautiful song. He thought of her whisper, "You make me feel safe." He, a man who had never made anyone feel safe, not even himself. A hard man in a hard land, and this woman, this runaway heiress, had found refuge in his house. He had set a trap to expose a thief. Instead, he had uncovered a tragedy. As the sun climbed, painting the vast prairie in strokes of rose and gold, William made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of both their lives. He pushed himself out of the chair, his body stiff, and walked toward the kitchen. He found her there, already dressed in the familiar gray, her hair once again imprisoned in its tight bun. She was by the stove, making his coffee, the very picture of quiet efficiency. But he saw it now, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders were hunched, as if bracing for a blow. She hadn't slept either. "Good morning, Ellie," he said. His voice was softer than he intended. She jumped, startled. "Good morning, sir." She didn't look at him. "Breakfast will be a few minutes late. I overslept. It's fine." He moved closer. "I need to speak with you." The coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the stone floor. She let out a small cry and dropped to her knees, frantically trying to pick up the sharp pieces. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. I'll replace it, I promise." "I don't know what's wrong with me." He knelt beside her, his knees cracking in protest, and gently took her hands in his. They were cold as ice. "Ellie, stop." He pulled her hands away from the broken china. "Look at me." Slowly her head came up. Her green eyes, wide with fear and shame, finally met his. And what he saw in them, the resignation of a hunted animal, tightened his chest. "I know," he said quietly. Her face went white. She tried to pull her hands away, a desperate, panicked movement. He held on, gentle but firm. "Eleanor Blackwood," he said. He watched a tear break free and trace a path down her cheek. "Daughter of Judge Marcus Blackwood, former fiancé of Thomas Morrison." "Please," she choked out, the word tearing from her throat. "Please don't send me back. I'll leave. I'll go right now. But please don't make me go back to them." The raw terror in her voice was all the proof he needed. "I'm not sending you anywhere," he said, his voice a low growl. "But you need to tell me the truth. All of it. I wasn't asleep last night." She stared at him, her breath catching in a sob. He saw the war in her eyes, the desperate calculation of whether this man, this stranger, could be trusted with the truth that had cost her everything. He waited. And then the dam broke. "Thomas Morrison was my father's choice," she began, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "He was handsome, wealthy, powerful, everything a woman is supposed to want, and in public he was a perfect gentleman. Charming." She shuddered. "But when we were alone, he was a monster. He had a temper, a cruelty he saved just for me." She looked down at her own arm, as if she could still see the marks. "He would grip my arm so tightly, leaving bruises under my sleeves. He said it was because he loved me so fiercely, because he couldn't stand for me to disappoint him." William's hands tightened on hers. A hot, unfamiliar rage was building inside him. "The night before our engagement party," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "he came to the house. He wanted to give me my engagement gift privately. He cornered me in the library. He tried to force himself on me." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I fought him. I screamed. And he hit me." William felt the words like a physical blow. "I ran to my father, my lips split, my eye already swelling. But Thomas had gotten to him first. He told my father I'd been drinking, that I'd thrown myself at him and become hysterical when he rejected me. He even had a friend who backed up his story." Her voice turned bitter, laced with the poison of ultimate betrayal. "My own father believed him. He said I was a silly, hysterical girl trying to ruin a good man's name. He ordered the wedding moved up to stop any more scandals." "So you ran," William finished for her, the pieces clicking into place. "I ran," she confirmed, "with nothing but the dress I was wearing and a few pieces of jewelry I could sell. I've been running ever since." He was quiet for a long time, the broken coffee cup forgotten on the floor between them. He looked at this woman, this girl who had been so utterly alone, and felt a surge of awe at her courage. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "I was afraid," she admitted, fresh tears spilling. "Afraid you'd believe the lies, just like everyone else, that you'd see me as nothing but trouble and send me back." William stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. The top of her head barely reached his chin. "Eleanor," he said, using her real name like a vow. "Look at me." She did, and for the first time she didn't look away. What she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. It wasn't pity, it was respect. It was admiration. It was something more. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "To give up everything, to face this world alone, rather than surrender to that kind of evil. That's a strength most men could only dream of." The tears that came now were different. They were tears of relief, washing away months of fear. "You're safe here, Eleanor," he said, and it felt like the most important promise he had ever made. "For as long as you want to stay, no one will ever hurt you again. I swear it." A fragile peace settled over the ranch house in the days that followed. It was a strange, unspoken truce. He was no longer just Mr. Hayes, and she was no longer just Ellie. They were William and Eleanor. He found himself looking for her, listening for the sound of her humming. She started to meet his gaze, and A tentative smile would sometimes grace her lips. For the first time, the giant, empty house started to feel like a home. They were in a delicate bubble of safety, a world of their own making. But bubbles are made to burst. 3 days later, the bubble exploded. Young Billy Henderson from the telegraph office came galloping up to the ranch, his horse lathered in sweat. He found William in the barn, mending a saddle. "Mr. Hayes," Billy panted, thrusting a yellow envelope at him. "Marked urgent. The operator said to bring it straight away." William's gut clenched. Urgent was never good news. He tore it open. The black letters on the flimsy paper seemed to mock him. Thomas Morrison and Associates. Arriving November 1st. Stop searching for missing person. Eleanor Blackwood. Stop reward offered for information. Stop advise if seen stop. The telegram was from a private detective agency in Chicago. William's blood ran cold. November 1st. That was tomorrow. He found her in the small garden she'd planted behind the house, humming softly as she tended to the last of the autumn vegetables. She looked up when he approached, a genuine smile on her face, a smile that vanished the second she saw his expression. "William, what is it?" He didn't speak. He just handed her the telegram. He watched her face crumble as she read it, the color draining away until she was as pale as a ghost. The paper fluttered from her fingers and landed in the dirt. "He found me," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo of the terror he'd heard in the kitchen. "After all this time, he found me." "He's not here yet," William said, his own voice tight. "We have today. We can figure something out." She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were freezing. "There's nothing to figure out. I have to run. I have to leave tonight. I can go north. To Canada, maybe." "No." The word was sharp, a crack of a whip. She looked at him, stunned. "You're not running anymore." "You don't understand," she cried, desperation making her voice high and thin. "Thomas is powerful. His family is connected to senators, judges, everyone. If he finds me here, he won't just take me back. He'll destroy you for helping me. He'll ruin your business, your reputation, everything you've built." He stepped closer, close enough to see the panic swirling in her green eyes. He took her trembling hands in his. "Then we'll face him together." "Together?" she echoed, lost. He took a deep breath. The words were on his tongue before he'd even consciously formed them. They were insane. They were reckless. They were the only thing that made sense. "Marry me, Eleanor." She stared at him, her mouth slightly open, as if he'd started speaking in a foreign language. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "As my wife, you'll have legal protection. Morrison may be a big man back east, but this is Montana. The law here protects a married woman. As Mrs. William Hayes, he can't touch you." "William, you're not serious," she stammered, pulling her hands back. "You can't be. You barely know me. 3 days ago, I was your housekeeper." "I'm not asking you to marry me to protect you," he said, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Though I will protect you with my life. I'm asking because in these last 3 months, you've become more important to me than this ranch, than all the money, than anything. I'm asking because the thought of you leaving, of this house going back to being silent and empty. I realized I was falling in love with you, Eleanor Blackwood." The world seemed to spin around her. Love. It was a word she associated with pain, with possession, with bruises hidden under silk sleeves. "I know it's fast," he went on, his voice softer now, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. "And I can't offer you fancy parties or a life of leisure. All I have is this land, this house, and me. But I can offer you respect, a real partnership, a life where you can be yourself without fear. I'm offering you a home." "But the scandal," she whispered, "when he tells everyone who I am." "Let them talk," William said with a dismissive shrug. I've never given a damn what people think, and I'm not starting now. The only thing that matters is what you think. Do you trust me, Eleanor? Could you build a life here with me?" She looked into his face, into the eyes of this hard, quiet man who had shown her more kindness than her own family. She saw no lies there, no hidden agenda. She saw strength and honesty and a fierce, protective love that was nothing like the twisted version Thomas Morrison had offered. And in that moment she realized a startling truth. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you made me sit at your table. You saw me, when no one else did." A slow smile spread across William's face, transforming his rugged features. "Then marry me," he said again, lifting her hands to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "We'll ride into town this afternoon. We'll find the preacher. We'll be married before the sun goes down, before he even sets foot in this valley." "Are you sure?" she asked, one last tremor of doubt running through her. "Once we do this, my past becomes your future." "Eleanor," he said, his gaze unwavering, "your past doesn't define you. Your courage does. And I would be the luckiest man on this earth to have that courage by my side for the rest of my life." They were married in a dusty, sun-drenched church, the only witnesses a bewildered preacher and his wife. Eleanor wore her simple gray dress, but in her hair she wore a crown of wildflowers William had picked from the prairie. He stood beside her, solid and sure, his hand holding hers, and when he said, "I do," his voice echoed in the small church, a promise as vast and unshakable as the Montana sky. 2 days later, a fancy carriage, entirely out of place in the rugged landscape, rolled up the long drive to the Hayes Ranch. 2 men stepped out. One was a grim-faced man in a city suit, his eyes darting around like a nervous bird. The other was handsome, impeccably dressed, with a charming smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. Thomas Morrison had arrived. They found Eleanor in her garden. She was on her knees, tending her plants, her simple dress smudged with dirt. When she heard their footsteps, she stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. William came out of the house and stood beside her, his arm settling possessively around her waist. Thomas's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he took in the scene. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of steel. "You've led us on quite a chase, my dear." Eleanor lifted her chin. She looked at the man who had haunted her nightmares for months, the man who had stolen her name and her life. And she felt nothing. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, cold strength she didn't know she possessed. "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is Eleanor Hayes, and you, sir, are trespassing on my husband's property." Thomas Morrison's mask of civility finally cracked. His face, handsome only moments before, twisted into an ugly sneer of disbelief and rage. The detective beside him shifted uncomfortably, his professional gaze moving from Eleanor's defiant face to William's stony one, and then to the simple gold band glinting on Eleanor's finger in the afternoon sun. "Husband?" Morrison spat the word like it was poison. "Don't be ridiculous, Eleanor. You can't possibly be married to this rustic clod. This is just another one of your hysterical little games." "It's no game," William said, his voice a low rumble. He took a step forward, shielding Eleanor slightly with his body. "My wife and I were married 2 days ago by Pastor Williams, right here in town. It's all legal and binding. Now she's asked you to leave. I suggest you do it." Morrison laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think a piece of paper from some backwater preacher means anything? Her father, Judge Blackwood, has given me power of attorney. She is mentally unstable, a runaway. I am here to take her back to the care she so desperately needs." He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Come now, Ellie. End this foolishness. Your father is worried sick. My father, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the air like ice, cared more about your family's name than his own daughter's safety. I am not going anywhere with you. The detective cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, he said quietly, if the lady is legally married, our authority here is questionable. Morrison shot him a look of pure venom. Her husband is a charlatan who has clearly taken advantage of her fragile state. I will have this sham marriage annulled, and I will have him ruined for his part in this. He turned his glare back to William. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Hayes. I will bury you. I'll buy out your loans. I'll see to it that no one in this territory will buy your cattle. You'll be a beggar on your own land. Is that a threat? William asked, his voice dangerously calm. It's a promise, Morrison sneered. Now, Eleanor, for the last time, come with me. He lunged forward, grabbing for her arm. It happened fast. William moved with a speed that was terrifying, his hand shooting out and clamping down on Morrison's wrist like a steel trap. Morrison cried out in pain and surprise. You will not touch my wife, William said, his voice low and lethal. His gray eyes were chips of ice. Not now, not ever. Get off my land before I have my men remove you. He shoved Morrison back. The handsome society man stumbled in the dirt, his fine suit now dusty and ridiculous. He looked at William with pure, unadulterated hatred. This isn't over, Hayes, he snarled, scrambling to his feet and brushing himself off. You've made a powerful enemy today. You'll regret this. He stormed back to the carriage, the detective following with a troubled look on his face. As the carriage kicked up dust and disappeared down the long road, William and Eleanor were left standing in the sudden silence. The first battle was won, but they both knew the war had just begun. That night, doubt began to creep in. As Eleanor lay beside William in the darkness, the reality of what they had done settled over her. He'll do it, she whispered into the quiet of the room. He'll ruin you, all because of me. William turned, gathering her into his arms. He can try, he said, his voice a firm anchor in her sea of fear. This land, this ranch, it's in my blood. I didn't build it by backing down from bullies. He paused. But we can't just wait for his attack. We need to fight back. There has to be a way to expose him for what he really is. A new, terrifying thought took root in Eleanor's mind. There was more to the story. A piece of it so dark and damning she had buried it deep, hoping never to speak of it again. There's something else, she said, her voice trembling. Something I didn't tell you. The night he attacked me, we weren't entirely alone. William sat up, listening intently. What do you mean? There was a stable boy, she explained, the memory making her feel cold. A young man named Daniel. He heard me scream. He tried to help me. He came into the library with a fireplace poker. He told Thomas to get away from me. What happened to him? William asked, his voice tight. Eleanor began to sob, the memory she had suppressed for so long coming back in a horrifying rush. Thomas was enraged. He turned on Daniel. There was a struggle. Thomas, he was stronger. He pushed Daniel. His head hit the corner of the heavy oak desk. There was so much blood. He didn't get up. William was silent, the horror of her words sinking in. Thomas told me Daniel had tripped and fallen in the dark, she choked out. He said if I ever told anyone what really happened, he would make sure I was blamed for it. That he would tell everyone the stable boy and I were having an affair, and that in our panic I had pushed him. My father arranged for everything to be hushed up. They said it was a tragic accident. They sent Daniel's family money and shipped his body home before anyone could ask questions. That's the real reason I ran, William. I wasn't just running from a monster. I was running from a murderer. The secret was out. hanging in the air between them, more dangerous than any financial threat. This wasn't just about a broken engagement anymore. This was about murder, and Eleanor was the only witness. William held her, his mind racing. Morrison wasn't just a brute. He was a killer, and he wouldn't just try to ruin William now. He would try to silence Eleanor permanently. The stakes had just been raised to life and death. The next morning, William gathered his most trusted ranch hands, men who had been with his family for years. He told them a simplified version of the truth, that powerful men from back east were trying to intimidate his new wife and steal his land. He didn't need to say more. Their loyalty was to him and to the ranch. They became his eyes and ears. Morrison, true to his word, began his assault. He set himself up in the town's finest hotel, spreading his money and his poison. He told a convincing story to anyone who would listen. He was the grieving fiancé, come to rescue his beloved from the clutches of a brutish rancher who had taken advantage of her delicate mental state. Some people, swayed by his wealth and smooth talk, believed him. The town began to divide. Old friends of William's became distant. The banker in town suddenly called in alone. Meanwhile, the detective, a man named Gable, seemed to be having his own crisis of conscience. He was seen drinking alone at the saloon, his face grim. One of William's men overheard him arguing with Morrison. "The story doesn't add up," Gable had said. "The woman I saw wasn't hysterical. She was terrified, and she's married now. We should leave." Morrison had replied with a threat that silenced him. William knew he needed more than just his men's loyalty. He needed proof. He sent a detailed telegram to a contact he trusted in Chicago, an old Army friend who now worked as a journalist, asking him to dig into the accidental death of a stable boy named Daniel at the Blackwood residence 6 months ago. Days turned into a week. The pressure mounted. A small fire broke out in one of William's barns. It was put out quickly, but the message was clear. Accidents could happen. Eleanor was a prisoner in her own home, afraid to even step into her garden. The love and peace they had found was being choked by fear. One evening, as William was reviewing his dwindling finances, a knock came at the door. It wasn't one of his men. It was Gable, the detective. He looked soaked, though it wasn't raining, and his face was pale. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice low, "can I speak with you and your wife? Alone?" William let him in, his hand never far from the pistol on his belt. Eleanor came into the room, her eyes wide with apprehension. Gable stood twisting his hat in his hands. "I'm a private investigator," he began. "I take jobs. I don't usually ask questions. But this job, it's wrong. I've been watching you. Watching Mr. Morrison. He's not trying to save a woman. He's trying to cage one." He looked directly at Eleanor. "Ma'am, he's planning something. He's hired a couple of rough types from the saloon. He's getting desperate. He spoke about needing to get you alone to reason with you. I think he means to abduct you." Just then, one of William's men burst in. "Boss, there's a stampede. The northern herd broke the fence. They're heading for the canyon." It was a classic diversion. William knew it instantly. Morrison had created a crisis to draw him and his men away from the house, leaving Eleanor vulnerable. "You stay here," William said to Eleanor, his voice hard as stone. "Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me." He looked at Gable. Are you with him, or are you with us?" Gable looked from William's determined face to Eleanor's terrified one. "Morrison paid me to find a missing person," he said, his voice firming with resolve. "He didn't pay me to be an accomplice to kidnapping, or worse. I'm with you." "Good," William said. He turned to his man. "Take half the men and deal with the herd, the rest of you with me. We're going to set our own trap." The ranch house fell silent. Eleanor locked and bolted the doors, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. She waited. Every creak of the old house made her jump. Minutes felt like hours. Then she heard it. A man's voice calling her name. Morrison. "Eleanor, I know you're in there. Hayes is gone. It's just you and me now. Open the door and we can talk this over like reasonable people." She held her breath, backing away from the door, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace gripped in her hands. "Fine," his voice came again, colder now. "Have it your way." There was a loud crash as the back window in the kitchen shattered. Eleanor screamed as two large, rough-looking men climbed through the broken glass. They saw her and grinned, advancing slowly. She swung the poker wildly, trying to keep them at bay. Suddenly, Morrison was there, stepping through the front door, which one of the men had unbolted from the inside. He looked at her, his charming mask completely gone, revealing the monster beneath. "Did you really think that farmer could protect you from me?" he sneered. "You belong to me, Eleanor. You always have." He nodded to his men. "Grab her." As they lunged for her, the world erupted into chaos. The front and back doors flew open at the same time. William and his ranch hands stormed in, their faces grim, their guns drawn. Gable was right behind them. "Drop it, Morrison," William commanded, his voice echoing with cold fury. Morrison's men froze, their hands in the air, but Morrison himself was unhinged, his eyes wild with rage and desperation. He grabbed Eleanor, pulling her in front of him as a shield, a small Derringer pistol appearing in his hand, pressed against her head. "Stay back," he shrieked. "All of you, or I'll kill her. I'll kill her right here." "Let her go, Morrison," William said, his own gun steady, aimed at the man's heart. "It's over." "It's not over until I say it is," Morrison screamed, his grip tightening on Eleanor. "She ruined everything. That stable boy. He should have kept his mouth shut, just like she should have." It was a confession, spat out in a moment of pure, panicked rage. And Gable, the detective, heard every word. "So the boy didn't just fall," Gable said, his voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. "You killed him." Morrison's eyes darted to Gable, a flicker of realization that he'd made a fatal mistake. In that split second of distraction, William saw his opening. He didn't fire his gun. Instead, he threw the heavy oil lamp from a nearby table. It soared through the air and smashed against the wall right beside Morrison's head, showering him with oil and shattered glass. He flinched, instinctively turning his head, loosening his grip on Eleanor just enough. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She drove her elbow back hard into Morrison's ribs. He gasped, and she wrenched herself free, diving to the floor. The room exploded with the sound of a gunshot. But it wasn't Williams. It was the local sheriff who had been alerted by Gable and had come in behind them, who fired his rifle. Morrison crumpled to the floor, clutching a bleeding shoulder, his Derringer clattering across the wood. It was over. In the aftermath, everything came to light. Gable gave his statement to the sheriff, recounting Morrison's confession. A new telegram arrived from William's journalist friend. Under renewed scrutiny, the Philadelphia authorities were reopening the investigation into Daniel's death. Faced with Gable's testimony and the threat of extradition for a murder trial, Thomas Morrison's reign of terror was finished. His father, the judge, facing a scandal that would destroy him, disowned his former future daughter-in-law completely, wiping his hands of the entire affair. Weeks later, as the first snows of winter began to blanket the Montana prairie, William and Eleanor stood on their porch, watching the world turn white. The town had embraced them, their story of courage and love becoming a local legend. The ranch was secure, their home was safe, and their future was their own. Eleanor leaned her head on William's shoulder. She was no longer Eleanor Blackwood, the runaway, or Ellie Murphy, the ghost. She was Eleanor Hayes, a woman who had faced down her monster and won. A woman who had found not just a refuge, but a home in the heart of a man who saw her and loved her for exactly who she was. "I love you, William Hayes," she said, her voice soft in the quiet air. He wrapped his arm tighter around her. "I love you too," he said. And in the vast, wild heart of Montana, their new life was just beginning. If you were moved by William and Eleanor's story and believe that courage can overcome any darkness, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the incredible stories we have coming up next.